China has made a model called Special Economic Zones, and they want to attract foreign investment. They want to attract foreign technology and know-how, and they want to attract vast growth fast along the coastal areas. Thus the China Coastal Core, which you see here in Shenzhen and all this other area is massive growth. Also in Macau and Hong Kong and various other areas, but also abroad where they invest in other countries. They want cheap labor because China labor is not cheap as it was. The problem being is that the one-child policy decades later has produced less people that would work cheap. There's also a dichotomy or kind of a conflict between the peasant class and those that are getting rich, a new upward mobile entrepreneurial class. That's another story altogether. But the main thing is, as Deng Xiaoping 4 decades ago said, let a few people get rich first. And so what happens is a few people did get rich first, and a ton of people are getting rich. And this is going to be a big conflict with the workers in the Communist Party. Put that aside. Let's just concentrate on this really thing that they created that works real well, these special economic zones. Now, what's this have to do with the following video about China going to the moon? Well, China wants to set up housekeeping basically on the dark side or the far side of the moon. And they want to do it by inviting investment from backers of countries all over the world to pour money in, to bring their technology in. In other words, they want other people to invest in their own ideas and grow that way. And so they have this great idea, and we're going to watch this on YouTube for a few minutes about this fellow talking about this. But just keep in mind on page 377 of your book, the special economic zones, and I'll read what the book says. If you don't have your book, I'll read what the book says, and if you have your book, you can read it again. But the government introduced a 3-tier system of special economic zones, SEZs, which would attract technologies and investments from abroad and reshape the economic geography of China's seaboard. Within these economic zones, investors were offered numerous incentives that include low taxes, ease, import-export regulations, and simplified land leases. Here's the key. The hiring of labor under contract was permitted. Products made in the economic zones could be sold on foreign markets and under some restrictions in China as well. Even Taiwanese enterprises were welcome. That's amazing. Okay, let's look at this thing about the moon. I think it's fascinating because it all goes hand in glove with the expansion of China. I'm not going to play the whole thing. This thing is 12 minutes long and it's a bit dry, but this is some of the key elements that I want you to understand why they want to go to the far side of the moon and build a base.
Work here on Earth really well, at least for China. Now, once again, this is going to probably create a lot of division in the comments because all of my previous China videos resulted in many people focusing on the fact that China is definitely doing a lot of bad things. And I don't disagree with that. But there is still a lot of things that they are doing that no one else is doing. One of them was, of course, the tremendously large reforestation project that I mentioned in one of the previous videos. But there is something else that they're doing that also works for them really well. And that something has to do with economics. So essentially, what China has just officially announced is that they want to create what's known as a special economic zone on the moon. Now, it might not really make much sense, especially if you're coming from the Western world or the English-speaking world where such a thing doesn't exist, but let me very quickly explain to you what this implies. The first special economic zone that was ever created anywhere in the world was this right here. This is the really famous area known as Shenzhen. And this is the image about 2 years after this area was created, with only one main purpose. China decided to create these regions around the country with only one purpose: bring in the money from the outside and encourage people to come to these areas and to use the relatively cheap labor in these areas to construct, produce, or make anything they wanted, and then basically use this for an export. Essentially, it was a way for China to create these areas where anyone can come in, use the labor, build and create anything they wanted, and then take those items and bring them back to their own country. And essentially, it was a way for China to bring in the external capital allowing them to not actually pay any taxes whatsoever and also be independent from any kind of governing, while at the same time helping those areas develop quite quickly and transform them into something that they never were able to do before. It worked amazingly well for Shenzhen. It became essentially the factory of the world where most of the electronics are produced today.
And that's the reason they're doing that. So we've copied that. I'm retired from Fulton County, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia has done the same thing with special economic zones. We call them urban enterprise zones, but they do the exact same thing as what China is. So we're kind of copying them a little bit. Anyway, I'll continue.
And at the same time, it allowed China to benefit from all of this financially, but also learn how to apply this to other areas. They've created a few of these around China. All of them, or most of them, were pretty successful. And most of this success came from the fact that people or companies that came in to do things there didn't have to pay any taxes. The labor was really, really cheap. And at the same time, none of the communist government ideals were actually effective there. So essentially, this was an area where you could do.
In other words, that's important because that, along with what your book says, they don't want to change communism. They don't want to change their policy, but they set aside certain of these zones for growth, economic growth, and money they desperately need. Now, they made that leap to the moon, and let's see what else he has to say on this. I'm not going to keep on this too long.
Anything you want, you can build anything you want and use very cheap labor. And it slowly built up China using the finances from other countries. Having become pretty successful at developing these areas and also having essentially developed a very effective strategy for how to develop these areas, they then took these ideas and applied them to other countries. And this is what most people don't actually realize. They took this fundamentally Chinese idea and they exported it, in a sense, to countries that now had the cheap labor. Mostly because the Chinese labor was no longer cheap and most countries actually started to kind of go to other areas to try to create their products. And this image from Asia Briefing Limited summarizes quite accurately where all of these zones are located around the world now. Pretty much most of the African countries, a lot of European countries, very many Southeast Asian countries as well, have these zones now that are actually being developed by China. And in all of those areas, a very similar concept is being formed. Here's one from the country of Belarus, where China is very actively trying to create this industrial park. And it essentially is building the same thing. The companies from around the world will come in there, they'll use the cheap labor to build up anything they want, and the thing is, this time China will also benefit from all of these developments. In other words, in some way you can see this as Chinese domination of the world through economics. In another sense, you can also see it as a very brilliant way of helping the underdeveloped countries develop, while also bringing a lot of really interesting ideas to the table. Something that no other country has actually been able to do just yet. So anyway, so all of this is politics and economics. This is not really the main idea for this video. The main idea is the recent announcement by one of the directors of China Aerospace Agency to essentially start planning a mission to the moon that would create the special economic zone on the moon. In other words, they are planning to create this type of a special economic system right here on our satellite. And this is kind of where things get a little bit more tricky because, first of all, back in...
Okay, he's going to talk about, we have a treaty that no one can own the moon. So this is where China is kind of getting out of their own comfort zone. Of course, the moon, as if the moon wasn't as uncomfortable as it is, you can't own it. We have an international treaty. They signed on to it. They cannot claim any territory on the moon, nor can we. No one can own the moon. But they will go up there, build these bases. Let me fast forward and let you look at one. Let's see if we can find one. Hold on. There we go. They'll build a base like this, and the Soviets have dreamt of building a base like this. And then, but more or less, China wants to have this special economic zone of the moon. And it looks like they're on their way to it. They can't own it. And that's all I wanted to really talk about, to just kind of something interesting, what China's doing, looking for the future. The Russians have tried and they didn't succeed. We're not even on the radar with that. We may talk about it, but we're not going to do it. We're focused on Mars. All right. Well, that's about it. That's all I wanted to talk about for special economic zones in China.